Okay, I'm so excited. We have Tiffany Rosenhan here, and she was nice enough to come and talk to me about becoming an author. So a lot of you know that there's the big five. We talk about the big five in the publishing world, and they are the publishers that are legit, and they get your book out there, and they're really well respected. And Tiffany published with Bloomsbury, which is one of the big five, and so this is a huge deal, and I'm so excited to talk to her about becoming an author, her experience with becoming an author, and we'll share some writing tips, and just all the things you want to know about the behind the scenes of her life as a writer.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm
yes.
so happy to speak to your audience. So.
I know. I've been so excited about this. So she published Girl from Nowhere. So tell us about this book.
Okay, well, first you might see this is the advanced copy, so
yes.
This is a paperback version, and that's my final copy I see and make any changes that are desperately needed before it turns into hardcover. So this is Girl from Nowhere. It's a young adult fiction novel. It's kind of unique among young adult fiction genres because it is a teen romance disguised as a spy thriller, and a spy thriller kind of disguised as a teen romance. So it's a merger of those two categories of contemporary romance and thriller, and there's not a lot of spy thrillers in the teen market, certainly not with female protagonists, particularly ones that really do kind of run the show. Yeah. So it's unique among young adult fiction, so don't be deterred by the young adult label. It's more of a thriller than a romance, but there is a lot of romance.
But thank you for putting the romance in there, because I pretty much don't like to read a book that doesn't have some element of romance, and I
feel
loved
the same
that. I loved that, and this book made me want to be part of a secret operation. I've never read anything like this personally, and
really?
So
Great.
no, and so this was kind of the first of its kind that I read, and it was so fun and like surprising and exciting to me.
I love that.
Yeah, I just devoured it, and this is the kind of book
thank you.
that I'm so excited. I don't know why I haven't given it to my daughter yet, but I'm going to give it to my daughter because this is the type of character that I would want her to read about.
Oh, I love that.
And I can tell you were so intentional in creating her. Tell us a little bit more about that, like what it was like to create her character and what her character is like for those of
Okay, I love
the
that.
audience
Great
that haven't
question.
read it.
So, well, first what she's saying about the genres, spy thrillers, I definitely grew up reading spy thrillers, and that was where I wanted this book to be. So when I had the character in mind, I first had the character in mind, and then the plot of the spy thriller came later, but the character herself never changed. And so despite it being a spy thriller, I view this as a character story about a girl reconciling her past and kind of choosing her own future to the best that any of us can with the circumstances we're given.
I love that, what you just said, those two sentences, because that's something all of us can relate to.
Right.
So
and
cool.
I like to say she's an average girl in a complicated life with the kind of crazy skill set. And the reason I say that is because I think as teen girls, we're often, or at least I certainly felt ridiculed for my emotion and like the swinging behaviors and the swinging emotions and complexities of teenagehood. And I feel like that's something that should be embraced and not criticized. And I think the fluctuations in the average teenager, particularly teen girls, are too often critiqued, and they should be valued and received as these really amazing instincts that we have as females and as teenagers, even male teenagers, to kind of see the world in a different way that you only get to see once, and that's as a teenager. So she was always a teenage girl to me, and with those teenage instincts and those kind of primitive romantic feelings that we feel and that we still feel as women when we read the book, hopefully.
Yes, totally.
So she is Sophia Hepworth. She has lived abroad her entire life, and her parents are diplomats, and her dad works for NGOs, particularly in war-torn countries and areas of conflict. We don't really know much about his career nor her mother's, but we just know it's been fast-paced, and they've done a lot of travel over the years, and she's lived a lot of places. And because of that, and because it's a spy thriller, she's obviously developed this really unique skill set we learn about. She's familiar with, well, you'll learn in the book, she's familiar with weapons and languages.
Which I love so much, that she's familiar with both of those things.
It's fun. It's kind of different and fun, and it's really interesting to watch reviewers come in, because they'll have a reviewer will be like, it's preposterous or incredulous or unbelievable that this girl can do all these things, and I'm like, excuse me, that is not preposterous. It shouldn't be, because we receive men in film and television, adult men, as being incredibly skilled and capable, and we don't say that's preposterous. But if a teenage girl has those same equivalent skills, society and adults will say that's unbelievable. And I just totally disagree with that. I think it's 100% acceptable for a teen girl to have these skills. And the reason is the teen girls I know have those skills. They're maybe not as descriptive or as easy to throw into a book of like, I speak X amount of languages. But the girls we know are hardworking and skilled and capable, and this is just a hyper version of real teen girls. So Sophia Hepworth, sorry, that's a little bit of a tangent.
I loved that.
Sophia Hepworth has moved, she's lived abroad, developed these fun skills, but she's also had a very turbulent, traumatic past. And so she's moved to Montana, the small, made-up Montana town called Waterford. And I think I love the way the narrator in Audible says it, which is Waterford.
Oh,
I think I'm saying it right.
Waterford.
Waterford. I can't even say it right, but it's a little bit of a play on Glacier National Park, West Glacier. I don't know if any of you have been there, but the first time I visited Glacier, I was just mesmerized that this was in America, and it was so beautiful and stunning, and I always knew the setting would take place there, but I wanted a fictional town to have that creative liberty. I just needed that in the story, so it's called Waterford. And when she gets there, she is struggling to just overcome some trauma that she's experienced, and really just the trauma of having moved so often and having been on the go and moving quickly and just never having been situated. And I think as a child, I did move a lot. I did go to a lot of new schools, and a lot of those feelings, I think, are in the first few chapters of this book. That eagerness to settle down and stay in one place is a lot of, kind of encompasses Sophia's first few chapters, but she's simultaneously trying to overcome kind of the turbulent life she's been living with her parents, and her parents are just these, kind of ridiculous, cool old people.
Yeah,
not old, but adults. They're kind of fun. So she settles in Montana, and her parents are like, that past life is over. You can stay here. We're just going to settle down here. And then she kind of soon learns that maybe the past is not as far behind as she thinks. And I think it says, how long can she outrun her past?
Don't you love the cover? I'm obsessed with the title and the cover. And the characters. I loved Axel. He's the love interest, and he was incredible and so good. And it's so fun to read YA novels because they do spark that, romance again. I love reading about young adult romance. It's so fun because it's just we don't get to think about it often.
Absolutely.
And go back and live those feelings, relive those feelings as a teenager.
And I think especially not my book alone, but just other books and any book, adults will review it and say, oh, it's this insta love, that's not real. And I just disagree with that, because I feel like, not that this isn't still love, but I feel as though as teenage girls, we do feel love and that eagerness and that crush rapidly. It doesn't take weeks to develop. I mean, it can, but
that's a beautiful thing.
And it's okay.
Yeah.
And I think that's that primitive quality of that I still feel, maybe it's only me, but us, of that, the romance that we feel, in our stomachs fluttering when we remember what it's like to be a teen girl and have those flutters and that eagerness to see a classmate next door or walk by someone in the hall. And I don't think those feelings ever go away. They just develop, but I think it's easy to become detached as an adult and feel too good for it.
That's why I write, and that's why I read. I love to experience that.
Yes, experiencing that. And I hope, I guess, that people feel a little bit of what it was like to be a teen girl and the fondness of that really raw emotion and the raw feelings of wanting to fit in and be loved and fall in love. And I loved that as a teenager. I loved reading about it. I still do. And
yes, same here. So. And it's tasteful. It's very tastefully done. And and that's what I love is that I can hand this to my daughter and I don't have to worry about a lot, any language or, sex and things like that kind of content. And I love books that I can read and enjoy and read aloud to her.
Right.
But she can read and love just as much as me. So you've done an amazing thing here.
I tried. I was really worried about it being totally R-rated, and all the main trade reviewers came back from New York and they're like, it's PG. So
yeah,
it's PG. Although I will say my 10-year-old read it and listened to it and she goes, oh, Mom, you said hell. And I did.
In Australia, where I went to high school, that is not a swear word. That is not at all a swear word. So hell and damn are okay. That's all right.
And those
in my book.
But just once. And I didn't know you grew up in Australia.
Yeah.
Oh, fun.
It was
so
incredible.
I wonder how much this kind of resonated with you with your experience abroad.
So much. I think that's a huge reason why I loved it, is being the new girl.
Yes.
And so I related to her because I was the new girl.
I can't
Not
even
just
imagine.
a new girl at a new school, but I was American and came from Utah, small town Utah. And so there was a lot of context there that made it, hard to adjust, but exciting to
Yeah.
be in a new place. And so I loved that in your book that there was so much traveling, and your descriptions of the places she went were so visceral. And even the food and the smells and the sounds, I was like, whoa, like she's putting me right there. So tell me more about that. Like, you obviously, like, you're a very intelligent person, an intelligent writer, and that came through in the book. And I want to hear more about your background and like how you. I have a lot of questions.
No,
so
that's great.
how
I have
you
a lot of answers.
like, tell me your experience with languages and traveling and weapons.
Oh, okay.
3 questions in one. How did you
travel weapons? Well, I feel like I have to quantify all this by saying I was an avid reader as a child, and we'd go to my grandparents' farm in the summer, and we could play outside, we could do chores, or we could read. And my grandma just had a house full of books, and she collected like encyclopedia collections from every decade. And so my twin and I love to read encyclopedias. I still do. It's like my happy place.
Oh my
so
gosh,
I think
that makes me so happy. I
this,
found someone as nerdy as me.
I really do. I mean, I just love it. It's like you dive into the story and you're like, what is this random fish I'd never heard of? And then simultaneously, my grandpa was a Marine in the Pacific during World War II. And I remember seeing his trunk of his clothing and talking to him about it. And I've been fascinated by military history since I was very young. And I almost minored in military history, but I just did history. So cool. And it's just fascinating to me. The tactical warfare and weapons operations has always been interesting to me. And then simultaneously, I've always loved travel and geography and cultures and languages. So I think what we see in this book is just a combination of things that interest me and putting them into a story. So the research and the reading was very fun for me. And I didn't have to do a lot of research till like the latter half of writing it, because so much of it was just natural. Not that I knew the specific details, but I naturally knew what was happening because of these like multiple layers of interest in geography and history of warfare and languages. I always wish I was a linguist. My mom's quite a linguist. And
do you speak other languages?
No, at least not that I would speak in public. But I like to pretend. And when
I
my
feel like
sister
you speak French.
No, it's very bad. I mean, I do. I don't, actually. I could fake it, I think, but I can't actually speak it.
Parlez-vous français?
Oui, oui. Un petit peu.
Moi aussi.
I like to pretend I do, and I feel like I know enough words in enough languages that I could fake it really well. But, you know, my twin sister and I, we got home from Taiwan one summer, and we'd had to memorize a lot, but I didn't really speak Chinese. But we came home and we thought we were tricking all of our friends because we would just, like, spew like 20 addresses back and forth at each other over and over again, like all the directions we knew and all the like the random questions we would just rapid fire discuss.
As long as you're fast.
And it sounded like we were speaking Chinese.
Act confident.
So I figure if you act confident, you know like 10 words in a language, you can just be like, oh, I just speak a little bit.
You can milk it.
You can milk it. And the funny thing is, everyone wants to speak English anyway, or speaks better English than I could speak any language. So even if I try, but people have asked if I could have one skill that Sophia has, and it's definitely linguistics. If I could go back in time and focus more on the languages that my mom tried to teach me, I think I'd be very pleased with the outcome.
I'm with you on that. I'm teaching my kids French right now. I
mean,
like you, I speak a little bit, but my kids are doing like different programs because I'm living vicariously through them, relearning with them, and I want them to have that skill. So
I've tried so hard, and it's hard work, I would say, especially in America where we live. There's not a lot of opportunity to speak abroad.
Yes, but exactly.
Even when we travel, I feel like the expectation is that they will speak better English than you speak French, and so even when the girls will try to speak it, I feel like they just end up
switch.
English.
I know. Yeah, I have that experience too. Okay, so I could talk to you for hours and hours, but let's shift to some skills for this audience. So some writing skills. Maybe share a few tips for someone who wants to publish a book, but let's start with the writing side.
Okay.
So what are some tips for starting and continuing and finishing a book?
Okay, well, I think
that's a big question.
I think number one is you have to be passionate about what you're working on. Doesn't mean it has to be the only thing you ever want to work on or the very best thing you'll ever work on. I always say, I hope this is my worst book. That's kind of what my hopes are. But I think
it's going to get better.
I hope so. I mean, ideally, you continue to improve and push yourself and work and learn new skills. And so I think writing is like just this constant, it should be just this constant, incrementally increasing ladder. But I think you, number one, have to love what you're working on. And the most important reason I say that is because it takes a lot of time. And if you don't like being in that world you've created, whether it's nonfiction or fiction, if you don't like so unless someone's paying you a lot of money in advance to write this story and you have an expertise, maybe that's different a little bit. But if let's just focus on fiction maybe for now.
Yeah.
If we were doing fiction, I think you have to love what you're working on and avoid writing something because you think it will sell or because you think it's what people want to hear. Because I think that lack of authenticity comes across to a reader.
Yeah.
And
they'll feel it if you love it.
100%.
And I've read books where I can tell the author is having fun and they enjoy being in that world, like you said.
100%.
And those are my favorite books because
I love that.
you can tell. Readers are smart.
Right.
And so I love this advice.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think even as a reader, even if there's a book, in fact, I can think of one that I didn't quite love the story, but it took place in this tiny Chinese village in like the 10th century. And the story didn't really resonate with me. The characters were really kind of, like I would call them underdeveloped. But I couldn't help but appreciate the book and enjoy the experience because I felt how much passion that author had for that time period. And the way you just felt the passion and the interest. And so it wasn't my favorite book. It wasn't the best book. But I didn't read it and think, gosh, it couldn't have been anything but, I couldn't have been anything but satisfied after reading it because of how I appreciated the author's investment into the story and the passion he felt. And I think that does come across with fiction. And but most importantly, you have to want to be in the book you're in. And because you're going to be there a long, long time.
Yeah.
So number one, be passionate.
I love it.
And if you're not passionate about it, move on to something you are. Because I don't think any of us have time to write something we don't love.
No.
And don't feel bad about, so that's first, passionate.
Okay.
Second, let's focus on like lost words. People sometimes stay in something if you're not passionate, or maybe a scene's not working, a chapter's not working, a character's not working, and you feel, as a writer, if you're getting started, you feel like every word is valuable. And it's hard to release those words because you feel like, I spent 1 month writing this sequence of events and it just doesn't fit in the story and it doesn't work out. And I think you have to let go of those words and don't consider them lost, like that was a lost cause. I firmly believe that all those words get you to the point where you find the right words. And so it's not that that month, or let's just say 10,000 words was wasted or lost. They're just building you and getting you, they're like steps. They're getting you closer to the next 10,000 words, which might be the words you're happy with.
I love that perspective. And I always heard that in the newsroom, like, kill your darlings.
Kill your darlings, that's the phrase.
Get to the point. And
I'll
admit, when I wrote my first novel, I used Scrivener, the program Scrivener. So I kept a little folder full of all my, what I called outtakes. So I would take them because I'm like, well, if for nothing else, like the word count, I need to record that I wrote this many words. And so I would take those chunks and sometimes full scenes and full chapters and copy and paste them into there so I didn't feel the pain as much.
Smart. I think that's the smartest way to do it because you don't have to delete it. But I think if you stay in something that you're not happy with, you're in like a hamster wheel and you need to move on. Yeah. And so I guess the question is, how do you start? And I think how you start is you sit down, oftentimes I still creatively write with a pen and paper a lot of times.
I love that.
And I will do it on my laptop, but there's something therapeutic about the physical act of writing. And because the writing is longer than writing with a pencil is longer than typing, and especially if you type really fast like I do, I think the act of physically writing it out forces my brain to process what I'm about to say in a different way than when I'm typing. And I think I give myself that buffer zone of time that I don't get when I'm typing to really think through my next word. And you think about the way letter writing has evolved, and you wrote a letter, you had 1 page to write a letter or a telegram, and you really thought about your words because you had to convey something in a short piece of paper, and you didn't have a lot of excess paper, a lot of excess pencils, and so you had to be concise and you had to be accurate and you had to be specific about what you were saying. And so I think writing with pen and paper by default forces me into that zone of these boundaries are established for me. So writing, whether it's a pen and paper or whether it's by a computer, and I talk with my hands a lot.
I love that so much, and I have to interject really quickly because you are just speaking my language with the pen and paper thing.
Right.
I have not hundreds, I exaggerate, 30-something journals filled with pen and paper writing. I still journal. I don't journal on a computer.
I'm talking to a journal like professional.
No, I journal pen to paper. Like I have to.
That.
And I love that you mentioned what it does for your brain, because there's a lot of research about how Maud Purcell, in fact, she's a psychotherapist and a journaling expert, and she talks about how when you put pen to paper physically, the left side of your brain is occupied. That's your monkey mind. You know, not, I mean, yeah, it's like the logical, rational, analytical side of your brain. And then, so it's used up with the writing, the physical act of writing, you know, pen to paper. And so then your right brain is freed up and opened up to do what it does best, which is to create into it and feel. I love that. And so by occupying that monkey mind, you're able to quiet your mind, the chattery part of your mind, and open up and delve deeper into, you know, your best words and your true feelings and your authentic self. So for journaling, that's huge. For writing, that's huge, because you're able, like you said, to slow down and be more concise and clear and say what you want to say. So, and obviously, like, I spend most of my time when I'm writing, you know, long form novels and things like that on the computer. But I love that you suggested that exercise. That can really be a mind-opening exercise to just write for a bit, you know, on paper and just play with words that way. So,
well, she articulated that very, very well. I'm fascinated by that, because that's exactly how I feel.
Yeah.
So
that was cool.
That was amazing. But I think, so I would suggest creatively, if you're really looking for tips, I would say creatively get like a legal pad and a pen and just start writing. And don't hold yourself to your words. Like, just start free writing, and you're going to find that almost none of those words you're going to spend the time to then transcribe into a laptop. But what those words will do will be get the wheels rolling in your head and begin to identify. And it's almost this searching mechanism that you're performing. And by writing out these words that are flowing through your head, at least I guess I have a lot of words flowing through my head, so
me too.
And if you don't, just start. Like, it doesn't have to be, this is not the novel. This is like the pattern you're going to use to get to your novel.
Yeah, and part of the pre-writing.
And the pre-writing. And really is just step one is just pre-writing. And you might find all these thoughts are disjointed, and they're not connected, and you're not developing a plot, and you're not developing a character, but somehow when you work it out by pen and paper, you begin to see, and I used this phrase yesterday, but you begin to see, like, I'm calling it like this explosion of words. You just throw them all down there, and then you begin to kind of sift through the debris that the explosion's left behind, and those are all those words, and then you just...
Of course, it's an explosion because of your background with, like, war and
explosions.
It makes sense.
It's the first thing that came to mind when I said it.
I love it.
And then you kind of sift through the debris and find the diamonds, and then you pick up those diamonds, and those diamonds are maybe like... I always say every story needs a heartbeat. Maybe it's like the heartbeat of the story, or maybe it's a specific timeline that you're like, you know, if I set this story here, I really want to dive into, I don't know, Poland in 1940, or, you know, Czechoslovakia and afterward, or Mozambique in the transition. And it's like all these places, or just Kentucky, it doesn't matter where, or Utah, it can be anywhere.
Yeah.
But you might find in writing it out that you are circling back to a specific... You might also find that in writing out, you're circling back to a specific theme. Maybe it's like this balance between a father and a daughter who don't get along, or sibling relationships, or falling in love, and you'll begin to see, and I call those are the diamonds, because that's what will propel your story forward. But I think you first have to really identify what that is, because without a purpose, to really draft a novel, at least for me, it would be very difficult. So I think it's first just creative. Before you start drafting, or at least before I start drafting, I want to just throw down all the creativity
and just get started. The brain dump, the explosion. Yeah. And I love what Neil Gaiman says. He's incredible. He's one of my favorite authors and teachers on writing. I've been watching his masterclass, and he talks about what you said, which is, you know, kind of looking for those thematic elements in that brain dump, in that explosion of words, like, and getting clear on why are you writing this story?
Right.
Like, and you don't have to fully know that going into it 100%. Like, some of that is discovered as you write, but kind of just being aware and looking for that. Like, why this story? What about it resonates with you? Is it a place, like you said, is it a specific place and location that really just resonates with you and makes you feel alive, and you want to bring that to life through a story?
Right.
Or is it, you know, that father-daughter relationship? Like, what is it that's going to carry your story? And looking for those little diamonds, just to echo what you said.
I love that. That's fantastic. And I think don't get too, and simultaneously, it's going to sound like I'm saying the opposite of what I was just saying, but it's not quite. And that is, it's really hard, and I know young adult is focused on this right now, which is message storytelling. And you're telling a story that you're trying to convey a message or share a specific experience, and those have a place. But I think it's very hard to do and do well.
Without it being like didactic, and here is the moral
Exactly.
of the story.
And I remember meeting a girl at a party once, and she found out I was writing, and she's like, oh, I'm writing this young adult book. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's fantastic. Tell me about it. And she's like, well, I'm really trying to teach kids accounting. And I was like,
Accounting,
okay.
like numbers accounting?
Yes. And so, like, financials and accounting is what she said. Well, she said accounting.
Okay.
And so I was like, that's interesting. She goes, yeah, I just think if they learn about, like, what this process is and, you know, how to, not spreadsheet, but how to use accounting in your daily life. And she's talking about more financials, I think is what she's really talking about. But that was the whole message. And I just thought, okay, that's really, really hard to do, because if you're going to read a book about accounting, you're going to read a book about accounting.
Right.
And so...
Is this a nonfiction book?
No, fiction.
Oh, fiction, where she's using
Fiction,
the fiction
teen
to
novel
carry
distillery
through
about
the message
accounting.
of accounting.
Yes. So I'm saying don't do that. Don't, like, when you find those diamonds and those nuggets of something carrying your story forward, that's going to be subtle throughout the story.
Yeah.
Don't look at that and think, I want to tell a story about why, you know, divorce destroyed my life as a child or something like that. Like, that's a very message-driven story. But you can tell a story about how divorce has affected one of the characters in the story, and maybe the feelings of insecurity or anxiety that came with it are a theme you wanted to address for maybe a young adult audience or a middle grade audience. So that would be thematic, but it's really just this subtle underlying message that maybe if you were a child like that, you have enough passion or enough experience with those emotions that can drive a story forward. And there's a lot of really amazing middle grade fiction books that deal with emotional experiences in children, and they're really well done. And I actually suggest, if you are doing any type of message or issue or specially focused fiction, you spend some time in middle grade, because I think middle grade does this better than anyone. Any genre, across all genres, I think middle grade fiction really tells messages, really shares messages well, in a non-confrontational, non-abrasive way.
Yeah.
They're very good at that. So yeah, that's just a total tangent. But
no, I loved all of that. Okay, so
where were we? I feel like
what would you? Yeah, you gave a couple recommendations for starting a book. Let's talk maybe a tip that you have about the writing process, the day-to-day writing process. How does someone make space for writing? As a lot of my audience, they're moms, and so let's talk about that.
Okay. I feel like this always gets me in hot water a little bit, because I will say I had a husband who, well, my husband is alive. He's not had. He was in residency and then fellowship and then working. He was running a private practice and working. He's an ICU director, a physician, and also running medical device companies on the side. So he was just basically MIA for 13 years, and in a good way, but really around the clock. And so really actually around the clock, because he would see patients at night and run operations during the day, and that was just our lives for like a decade and 12 years really.
And she has 4 kids.
I have 4 kids.
4 girls.
So and he's since actually had a stroke, so he's not doing that now, and he's home, so we're just making up for lost time a little bit. But anyway, so I don't recommend that, is what I'm saying, because but during those years, I was home alone a lot at night and in the day, because I had 4 little girls back to back almost, and I really found that I enjoyed the act of writing. I never thought about publishing, and this was, I started writing, just typing and writing for fun. When my oldest turns 14 next month, and since she was a newborn, so it's been 14 years since I wrote, and the very first story I wrote was the first month I was home. And I think I got lucky. I was really young when I had her, and I felt great, and it was just like, I had nannied a lot before, and I'm like, what do I do? She's asleep like all day long, and I just didn't know what, so I wrote a lot because I had that time. And the first story I wrote was I got home from the hospital. It was like a kind of Confessions of a Shopaholic, like, what did you call that? Contemporary women's chick lit or something?
Yeah,
I'm sure that was popular at the time. And I wrote it, and I got home with this baby, and I found out my husband named her Petunia, and it was like the goofiest story. But I wrote this story, and it was so funny because art imitates life, and the story was I got home from the hospital, and I wanted to name our daughter Ellie, and my husband says that we named her Savannah in the hospital. And I did not remember that, and I still do not remember it.
Were you under the influence?
So I'm like, was I drugged? Because I do not remember naming her Savannah, but she's still Savannah, and I love the name, and it's great. But clearly, I was trying to like have some passive aggressive, like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
So that was the first story I wrote, and that was like a month or two, and I was never going to publish it. I didn't think about publishing. I just wrote it because it was. I think I was entertaining myself. I guess that's what happens when you move a lot and you're in a lot of books. I think you learn to entertain yourself. But once I did that, I realized that what I loved was not the end result. I loved the act of sitting down to write. And that became for me, and retrospectively, I look back and say, oh, I was doing that for my mental health. But it was subconscious. I always felt good and cheerful. I didn't feel like I needed something. But when I look back on it, I realized I inadvertently acted in a way that was very beneficial toward my mental health, because I was alone a lot. I was awake a lot at night with babies. She had night terrors forever, and I remember like my one baby that was colic. She was on my lap crying for like between 1 and 4 a.m. every morning for like 8 months, and I had another one with night terrors. And I remember I told my friends this, and before they had kids, they were like, oh, and once they had kids, they get it. But I just bought headphones, and these were like cheap headphones from like, this is pre-Beats. I just had headphones, and I would just wear headphones and type while my baby would just cry on my lap, because I realized that I couldn't do anything there was literally nothing I could do to soothe her. And it was on the dock, and the doctor's just like, she just cries. Yeah. And my husband wasn't there. If he was there, he needed to be sleeping. So I feel like for like 7 years, 8, 9 years, but really 7 solid years, I had a crying child at some point for a long time in the middle of the night. And I think I got lucky in the fact that I was young and I could go on very little sleep. So I don't have a great recommendation, is what I'm trying to say.
The headphones are an amazing recommendation.
Well, yeah, have
Put
headphones.
on headphones and write.
If your kids, I guess I'm more laissez-faire. My mom's a little bit of a hippie, and I love her. She's amazing. But she was very hands-off and the anti-helicopter parent. And so I think by default, I acted in that way a little bit. But took care. I love spending time with my children. I always enjoyed the mothering, the snack time. I love all that. But when they were crying or inconsolable, I just didn't feel the need to feel like I was going crazy trying to make them stop, because they wouldn't stop. And especially with night terrors. So because of that, I had a lot of nights to myself, is what I'm trying to say. Yeah. So I just wrote. I just had my laptop available, and I just typed incessantly and nonstop. And the reason I say it was for mental health without realizing it is because I could zone into this world that was fun, and I could make these characters do whatever I wanted, and I could tell whatever story. I mean, people always say, do you have more books? And I'm like, I have literally hundreds of thousands of words on my laptop that I don't know that I'll quite publish, but I wrote for fun. It was the act of writing that was what drew me to it. And so I did it for years. And so if you're a young mom, if you've got little kids, if you have older kids, I guess I don't know, you have to fit it in when it works for you. And for me it worked when my kids were supposed to be sleeping, because I felt like if I was there during the day when they were supposed to be awake, I was doing my job. And if they were supposed to be sleeping, I needed to do something for me. And it helped that my husband was away at the hospital, because like if he was home, I wanted to hang out and we wanted to be together. But because he was gone most nights, like 90% of the nights, I had the freedom. I would put my kids to bed at 7, and once they went to bed, I felt like I was not obligated to do these things for them that I would do during the day. So I just considered that my time, and between 7 and really like 1 a.m. I would write, and if I was awake longer, I would write. But I got headphones and I just typed. And I think my best advice is just don't feel the guilt that we all feel when we're doing something for ourselves. And I think I got lucky that, I would never say my husband would judge me for writing, but I think whenever there's another adult around, we feel like we're being like observed a little bit.
Totally.
And it's not, no criticism of him. I just think it's natural to feel like a little bit insecure, but without someone else like managing me or watching me, I just felt this freedom, and it was liberating. And I think being in that story, in any story, took me away from the reality that I'm home alone in a house by myself, and it's dark and scary out, and I'm really young and don't know what to do if I was robbed or who knows what, like all these scary things, and I've got screaming babies, and I don't know how to nurse, and all these things I didn't know what I was doing. I think writing simultaneously while I was in that phase kept me very healthy and focused on kept me confident, and it gave me something to look forward to every single day, because while I love doing with my kids, I love mothering them. It's exhausting and hard work, and it gave me something. It gave me a place I could go to every single night that didn't involve leaving my house. And I think that's what I needed more than anything, because when we lived away from home, not around family, and you're isolated, and this is, again, I feel like this makes me all sound really old, but like I didn't have Instagram, like we talked on our phones, but it was the best way for me to spend my time when I wasn't actively mothering or with my spouse. I just enjoyed writing, and I never had been one to like watch a lot of TV. I just couldn't, like I'm too like impatient, I guess, a lot of times. And again, we had like VHS tapes that we'd like record. I think.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was there.
So I think just give yourself like the go ahead to put on your headphones, get your laptop, and just zone out, because once you start, you will have, it's like the way people describe maybe running, which I absolutely detest and despise. But like, you know, people say once you start running, you just zone out and you just keep running. And I feel like with writing, once you get yourself, it's like the transition period. Get yourself into a position where you can put on your headphones, block out the noise, and just get out your pen and paper or your laptop, whichever you prefer, and just start and go for it. Because, and this is, I guess, more of a mothering issue than a writing issue, but I think it's really, really hard to find time to do anything you want to do. But somehow I justified it to myself, and I'm glad I did. And I realize now a lot of it was probably just subconsciously knowing I need this to stay mentally healthy and sane. I've got all these little babies at home, and I'm doing it on my own, and that was something that really brought me so much happiness, and for myself, separate from being happy as a mother, I was happy for myself. Like I loved figuring out what I could invent and create, and I don't know if I'm the only writer like this, but like I like to read what I've written, like entertain myself almost. Like
I think that shows that your writing is good, because if it entertains you and it makes you happy, like that will resonate with people, and it does. It does. Yes, definitely. I loved everything you said, and I feel like people will have more questions. And so if you guys have questions and you're watching this, please drop them in the comments, and I'll have Tiffany come back and answer those for you.
Happy to answer.
Yes. So ask your questions. And buy this book. Oh my gosh, you won't be sorry. And let your children read it. Boys and girls. It's not just for girls. I think it's...
I've actually been super happy with all the boys that have read it because of all the action, I guess you could
say. Exactly. I know. I think my husband would love it. I should have him read it. Yes. So thank you so much for being here, Tiffany.
Thanks for having me. And feel free to reach out anytime. I'm always happy to answer questions. And I always say I'll share what I know.
Yes.
If it's a good advice, it's probably from someone else that I stole. And if it's bad advice, it's because I made a mistake.
No. I highly doubt that. Okay. Well,
thanks,
thank you guys for watching. And yes, drop your questions in the comments. And go write. Go write today.
And have fun with it.
Yes.